Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Eugene England was one who liked to ask hard questions. Has it changed now for the church? Is it easier to ask hard questions? We'll talk about that with Terryl Givens. He's the author and biographer of Stretching the Heavens, the life and times of Eugene England. So you'll definitely want to check it out. And if you don't have this book, check it out. Also, I'm giving away a free copy of The God Who Weeps. It's autographed by Terryl Givens. So if you like this book, sign up to gospeltangents.com/Terryl, Terryl, and you could win an autographed copy. I'll be drawing that soon, so sign up today. Is it okay to ask hard questions in the LDS Church?
I think it is now. I think it is. I have had experience working as a consultant with the Church History Department on a number of projects, and the very direct and explicit instructions and feedback that I was party to with the brethren was unambiguously be honest, get it all out, and there isn't any topic which we are not comfortable addressing. To my mind, there was a watershed talk. It didn't precipitate a watershed change, but there was a watershed talk given in 2016 by Elder Ballard, President Ballard, to the CES educators. I think it was the most important talk given in my lifetime, which sounds like overstatement, but I don't think it is, because in that talk he effectively said we have not succeeded as church educators in preparing our young people for the challenges of this particular moment. We need to rethink how we engage those tough questions. And he was very direct and very explicit. He said a testimony is not an answer to a question. That in and of itself is a revolutionary kind of recognition and admonition, it seems to me, to church educators to say we have to honor and dignify and validate genuine questions and not skirt them or avoid them. He also said if you don't have the answer to a question, then go to a church historian or an expert in the field who does. So this is the first time that I have heard a church acknowledge that intellectuals are not the enemy of the church, but they can be powerful assets to the church and to a life of faith. And so I couldn't have been happier to hear those words. They don't seem to have filtered all the way throughout our culture and educational system.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because I had a conversation with a seminary teacher in my stake, and I asked him what he thought specifically of people like you, Paul Reeve, and he was like, they're a little edgy. So you're too edgy for, and certainly Eugene England was too, and I kind of want to tie that back, because while I appreciate the Elder Ballard talk, one of the problems with it is, we've heard about it. People in the Mormon history community have heard about it. But as you said, it was to CES employees. It wasn't to the general church. Right. Yeah. And so it's kind of hidden a little bit. And even I know Eugene England, he would give some talks or some of his articles and things to Bruce R. McConkie and Elder Packer, and they pushed back pretty hard against it.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, there's no question that arising out of a legacy of misrepresentation and opposition and hostility by the government and by most cultural institutions in the United States, that the Church History Department began with a kind of fortress mentality. I don't think anybody would deny that we were extremely protective. We sanitized our history in ways that avoided discussion of, things like the Mountain Meadows Massacre or other aspects of our history that didn't depict us in the best light. And I think there were good historical explanations for that attitude and that defensiveness. And I think that the church has very deliberately and self-consciously and methodically brought us into a better engagement with our history in all of those ways that I have mentioned. Eugene England was prescient in the sense that his principal concern was a reaction to his recognition, having worked in the church historical department. His recognition that there are narratives in our past that come into conflict. There are doctrinal views that have been espoused by individual leaders that are in conflict. And that as we move forward into this data-rich information age, our young people are going to become more and more aware of these discontinuities and conflicts. His primary motivation was to think through some of these problems and perplexities and work towards greater engagement and, his favorite word, dialogue with these. And the church wasn't ready to move in that direction in 1975, 1980. And they have since. But his concerns, his alarm, turned out to be absolutely, as I said, prescient and has been validated insofar as the church has embraced exactly that course of action which he was pleading for the church to embrace, which was acknowledge, engage, dialogue, confront these questions and these problems. And I think, as I said, the kind of the formal manifesto of that new attitude would be Elder Ballard's talk. Now, he gave it to the CES educators, and I think that was the right audience, because that's right. They're the kind of the intellectual custodians of the church. They're the ones who needed to hear it. And right, they had a mandate from J. Reuben Clark going back to the mid-1930s, right, the Chartered Course of Church Education, which very explicitly advocated kind of keeping the realms of the secular and the sacred separate. And our job as church educators is not to engage the world of scholarship and learning, but it's to foster testimony and faith. And that was appropriate and worked for a while. And then Elder Ballard said, we're in a new age, and that isn't the model we need anymore. So I took him to be saying, we're shifting gears because of new conditions, new challenges, new access to information, as well as a genuinely new understanding on the part of a historical department that has done much more work excavating and working through sources that weren't widely available or accessible in earlier times. So I think part of what we have to do is move beyond this kind of caricature of a bunch of old men in smoke-filled rooms conspiring. What are we going to let out this week, right? As if, right, all of these documents were in a vault and they let them out one by one, right? Well, the apostles aren't historians, and that isn't their primary responsibility. And so I don't think that there was any kind of nefarious scheming behind the scenes to keep all of this stuff hidden. We're discovering stuff every day as we work through these rich resources we have.
I know in your book you talked a little bit about an issue between Elder McConkie and Eugene England. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, that's probably the most famous conflict that erupted into public. In the late 1970s, he gave a talk in which he brought into dialogue a certain view of God represented by Hiram Smith and Joseph Fielding Smith.
Eugene England did this.
Yes, Eugene England did this, which emphasized the absoluteness of God in fairly conventional theistic terms, with a competing vision of God that he associated with the King Follett discourse of Joseph Smith and many subsequent elaborators, all the way through B.H. Roberts, that God is progressing, developing, expanding his dominions. And so this is, to my mind, Exhibit A. It's the best example of the problems, the challenges that Eugene England saw and how he thought they should be addressed. So instead of trying to silence or deny one or the other half of this kind of bifurcation in thinking about God, he tried to bring them into conversation and suggest how they both could be true, how we could make sense out of, we could reconcile both of them. He gave this talk to a small audience who was asked to give it again in the Varsity Theater, by which time Joseph McConkie caught wind of it. He had saw a copy, an advance copy, of what
He was Bruce's son, right?
Bruce R. McConkie's son. And to Gene England's credit, he invited Professor McConkie to come and to provide a response, which he did with very little grace, in very dogmatic, authoritarian, and insulting terms. He decried what Gene England had said as heresy and unfaithful to our tradition. Shortly thereafter, Elder McConkie himself made public criticism on 2 occasions, once at BYU and once in a general conference, without mentioning Gene by name, but he referred to the notion of a progressing God as one of the 7 heresies of the church. And he wrote a letter to Gene England in which he made this known to Gene, that he saw what he was saying and writing as heretical, and insisted that he cease and desist. That letter was leaked to the public, not by Gene. It was leaked to the public before he even got his copy of it. And so that is what made it a kind of public, it went viral, I guess we would say today.
Did Joseph McConkie release it, or do we have any idea who did?
We don't know, but I mean, there were 2 factions, and it wasn't Gene England or his partisans who released it. And so, given the fact that it was an embarrassing and in some ways humiliating assault on Gene and his ideas and efforts, it seems clear that it was released by somebody who was sympathetic to the critics of his position. And the whole thing was just, it was an unnecessary tragedy because, Gene wasn't teaching as doctrine, he wasn't proclaiming a solution, he was just saying, let's acknowledge these 2 traditions, these 2 positions, and let's see if we can't see them as somehow reconcilable. So I think it was a pure-hearted effort, and it redounded to his discredit, and I think it was hard for him ever to subsequently divest himself of that label.
Of a liberal?
Of heretic, liberal, provocateur, because certainly the weight of orthodoxy in the church at that time was pretty much going to align itself with anything that bore the name of McConkie, and that's certainly what happened at that time.
Yeah, I can't imagine being spoke about in general conference.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things about Gene is that his children would later attest that never once in their hearing did he utter the slightest word of criticism or negativism about Elder McConkie or any of the brethren. And that he even in his journal, even after these events, he referred to Elder McConkie and others as his heroes. So he was an incredibly meek man in that regard, at least, it seems to me.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Terryl Givens. In our next conversation, we're going to revisit the topic of atonement theories. Did that topic get Eugene England in trouble?
I have a copy of the response that he received from Elder Maxwell. And the way I would summarize it would be to say, Gene, love your article. The only fault I can find with it is none of it's true. Not exactly those words, but that was the essence. He just said he wasn't so sure that it was true. We don't have, I couldn't find a copy of Elder Packer's response, but we know that it was negative.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe at patreon.com/gospeltangents. You can hear the entire interviews there. Also, check out our new, improved, user-friendly website at gospeltangents.com. We've made it much more user-friendly, so check that out. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.